should see now is an overview of the fault categories. There are 4 categories. Now, you'll have heard of the first 3, which are minor or driver errors. You're allowed 15 of those. Serious faults, of which the top 10 would cover these, as would the dangerous. You're not allowed any serious faults. Likewise, you're not allowed any dangerous faults. There's also a 4th category that many people are not aware of, which is not worthy of note. Now, these are basically mistakes that people make that maybe are not completely in line with the standard, but they're not deemed to cause any problems, so the examiner doesn't note them down. The reason why I mentioned these is because a lot of people do become quite aware of their own driving during the driving test, and if they make any mistakes, they start to really worry about what's going on. If that's the case, they can then start to tot up in their own mind how many mistakes they're making, and before you know it, they think that they've reached the magical 15, and they start to give up. So be aware that not every single mistake you make is going to get marked down. If it has been marked down, there's nothing you can do about it. The best thing that I always say to people is to just carry on driving to the best of your ability, and let the examiner do their job. Let them be the one that decides how your test has gone. Don't do their job for them. So I'm just going to check that everybody can hear me. I should have probably said that earlier, but those that are watching, if you can't hear me, then please just say so. Otherwise, I'm going to carry on. I'm going to just, again, a couple more quick things about the test before we go into that top 10. Examiners' priorities. So when an examiner is judging your driving, they want to see that it is safe and legal. High on their list is your awareness of surroundings and evidence that the actions that you're taking are well planned and well executed. And you'll find that a lot of the top 10 reasons are reasons for failing the test purely because you're not showing that awareness. So the top 10 these would all be deemed either serious or dangerous faults. They're often caused by a lack of planning or checks or panic. Okay, and when you're in the driving test, it's very easy to start to feel as though you are panicked. And there's also the fear of not doing as asked, especially during the independent driving section. So a lot of people are so concerned that they do exactly what the examiner asked, i.e. take the next road on the left, that if they realise at the last moment that the left turn is just coming up, they'll try and make that left turn, when really the better thing to do is to carry on and not actually make any last minute decisions. So now the reason why people have signed in tonight, these are the top 10 reasons for failing your driving test. Should pop up in a second. Okay then, so there we go. Okay, just waiting for those to, not sure why they've not come up. I've posted them. Anyway, I'll go through them. Hopefully they'll come up in a moment. Number 1 is junctions observation, or the lack of. Number 2 is mirrors, a lack of the use of mirrors when you're wanting to change direction. Number 3, control of the car, steering. 4 is turning right at junctions. 5 is moving off safely. 6 is response to signs, traffic lights being the main offender. 7 is moving off, lack of control. This is more often than not a stall, but it could also include rolling back. Number 8 is positioning, normal driving. Number 9 is response to signs, in particular road markings. And number 10 is control during the reverse park exercise. Okay, let's have a look. No, sorry, forgot to press return. Blame the operator. There is your top 10 if you want to expand that. So I'm going to go through those in a bit more detail. So first one is junctions observation. So this is usually evidenced by you moving into another road user's way, or the examiner sees no evidence of any check being made before entering the junction. So you may go through a junction without incident, but you've not looked at all on the way, or the examiner's seen no evidence that the look was effective, in which case they're still going to mark you down. So how do we avoid this? Well, it's really important that when we're looking, we look and see. Okay? It's very easy when you're moving your head too quickly to not actually see things, even though your eyes may have passed them. If you try it, if you look at your screen now, and then if you move your head to the left of the screen, and then back again quickly towards the right, even if you don't shut your eyes, you don't actually see the screen in between. And this is what sometimes happens when people are making observations. They're moving their eyes too quickly, and there are certain physiology about the way the human eye works that means that basically it doesn't see when it's moving. So when you're looking, look, let your eyes settle for a moment, make sure you take in what you're seeing before you start to look in other places. When you approach your junction, always initially stop at behind the line if the view is not clear on approach. Now, an open junction, you may find that you don't actually have to stop, but again, you have to have looked on approach. This goes back to one of the points earlier on. If you go through an open junction where you had the opportunity to look well before, and the examiner didn't see you looking, then just getting across safely won't be enough to convince them that you're going to be able to carry on in that manner. So, but as I say, if the junction has a restricted view, always make sure you stop just behind the line if the view is not clear. And then once you've stopped, don't edge any further forward if you will consciously impede another road user. So there's a technique we use called peeping and creeping, or I tend to call it edging and leaning, where you would edge the car forward a little bit, lean forward in your seat to try and improve your view. You can only do that if you know that you're not actually definitely getting in the way of another car. If you can see another car approaching, you should hold your current position until you believe that it's clear, and then only edge forward very slowly. So if we look at some example hotspots from Halifax, these are some of the places where you will often find that observation at the junction becomes an issue. The crossroads at the top of Brackenbed. You're usually going to make a right turn here, going back towards the test centre. It's very near the end of the test, but you'd be surprised how many people fail at this point here. The crossroads is a difficult one when you're coming out from Brackenbed because of the lay of the land, because Pelleneau Road is quite busy, and if you're unlucky enough to have a lot of traffic coming from the opposite side of Springhall Lane, then that can also make it very difficult. Similarly, the crossroads at the end of Springhall Lane onto Gibbet Street, I've put Whalley Road there, but it should say Gibbet Street. Again, people make the mistake there of edging forward a bit too soon. The wall next to the school, at the I think it's Trinity Academy, that does block the view off to the right. So again, as you approach, you should make sure you're able to stop at the line and then make your proper observations. Be aware that the crossroads is not only the road opposite you, but there's also another road just to the left opposite you, which comes out and is also needs to be taken account of if there's traffic coming out of there. Cross Street West, now this is the road where the test centre is. When you turn right onto Pelleneau Road, you can find you have issues there, especially if buses are using either of the bus stops either bang next to the road as you exit or on the opposite side of the road. They make it harder to see, and again, if you're not looking properly, you may miss traffic coming. And then finally, at the end of Reservoir Road, this is going the other way. This is going towards Asda. When you get to the end of that road, you're likely to need to use the edge and lean technique because there's always cars blocking your view to the right hand side. Again, people will sometimes just push out a bit too far and then feel as though they're committed and keep going when there actually is traffic coming from the right hand side, sorry, from the left hand side. Again, be careful there. Now, These are not the only places where you can get this fault, but these are some of the common ones. Those last two, especially because they're quite near the beginning of your test, and again the nerves could still be kicking in at that point. So as I say, if anybody does have any questions, just type them in the comments box, and I will attempt to answer them. I'm going to move on to the second item now, which is mirrors change direction. Now again here, the examiners expect to see effective checks whenever the car moves sideways in the road. As well as the mirrors, this may also warrant a blind spot check as well, especially when you're in a multi-lane road. So the most frequent transgressions of this particular fault are when you're changing lanes, when you're overtaking cyclists or parked cars, or poor lane discipline. So to avoid this, you avoid it by planning your route in advance, and where possible not deviating from your plan, even if it's not exactly what you've been asked to do. And again, this comes back to the point in the earlier on, that a lot of these mistakes come from people panicking. Quite often when you're following a sat-nav or following signs or following the examiner's instructions, you'll have been given an instruction and maybe you've not fully understood it, or you've not realised exactly where the turn is, and then just as you're getting towards it you realise, oh, I needed to turn left here, or I needed to turn right here. Almost always it's fatal from a test point of view for you to actually then make that turn. It's far better for you to carry on in the direction that you've chosen, even if that's not the right way. As long as that's done correctly, it will not be a serious fault. The examiner or the sat-nav will simply reroute you. Making any last-second decisions almost always results in problems on your driving test, and quite often a fail. And this just reinforces that point, that it most often occurs when candidates misunderstand the road markings or make last-minute change of mind, quite often during the independent driving. So again, some example hotspots around Halifax where this happens a lot. The Orange Street roundabout near the cinema. Now those of you that have been learning with me for some time may hopefully have already mastered the roundabout, but if not, this may be one of the things that you still find a little bit confusing. You're not alone. A lot of people don't understand how to drive that roundabout, including a lot of experienced drivers. And on driving tests, quite often people make last-second changes of mind or misinterpret the road markings and end up in the wrong place. And those movements appear to happen to the examiner without any checks to make sure it's actually safe to move to the side. So again, this is why using the mirrors before you move, this is obviously key, the wing mirrors is important. Bull Green roundabout, again, is another issue. This is the roundabout in the town centre, and again it occurs quite often when you're coming up from the train station going towards Cow Green. People cut across the lanes and that causes problems if they haven't checked the wing mirror before they do that. And in any case, you really should be following the road markings as described, and as I usually advise, stay high on the roundabout. Moving to and from the bus lanes on Burnley Road and Huddersfield Road, again, it's down to understanding when you should or shouldn't be in the bus lane. This could quite often happens when people don't go in the bus lane and they should have done. They suddenly realise, oh, I should be in the bus lane, and they make a move into it without checking first. Or alternately, they've correctly used the bus lane, but because so many road users don't, they're not aware that they're about to be overtaken when the bus lane ends and they're wanting to merge back over to the single line of traffic. So making those mirror checks before you move to the left or the right is extremely important. Number 3, control of the car, in particular steering. The examiners will usually pick this up because they'll see that your road position is poor, or you might clip curbs on bends, especially on narrow roads. Wandering in the road, so you know you're driving down what should be a nice straight piece of road and the car's moving about slightly, moving towards the centre line and away from it when really it should be taking a steady course. Poor control of the steering wheel. Now by this I mean that whatever steering style you're using, the wheel is not necessarily moving smoothly or moving accurately to where you need to go, or touching the curb when parking. So pulling in, again, usually this is when people pull in a bit too quickly and they misjudge the angle that they're approaching the curb, and the left front hits the curb. That's why driving instructor cars have always got damaged left front wheels. Again, it most frequently occurs when candidates rush into a situation quicker than they can control, or when their eyes are too focused on hazards rather than on where they want the car to go. Looking well ahead, aiming for what you want to hit, i.e. the bend or the space, is what will help you be accurate. Example hotspots in Halifax where steering faults often occur. Travelling down Brackenbed Lane. This is the hill that connects Pennon Lane down to Wheatley. Quite often people make mistakes going down there because they let the speed of the car pick up a bit too much. It's quite narrow and they'll clip the curb on some of the bends as they go down, especially near the bottom, when really it should actually be getting quite easy. Once you've got near to the bottom of the hill, you're virtually out of it. But some people take their eye off the ball and just clip that bottom curb just at the final little bend. Again, another narrow road travelling from Mount Tabor towards Worley. Very bendy, very narrow. It's got a national speed limit on it, although you wouldn't be expected to be doing the 60 miles an hour that is actually legal. But again, people lose a little bit of track of their steering. It's narrow, the walls are there, and they'll tend to either get too close to the wall or too close to oncoming traffic. And finally, travelling down Ovenden Way. This is the dual carriageway that goes from Ovenden into the town centre, ending up at the Orange Street roundabout. It's a little bit bendy, and again, people can sometimes allow the steering to become a bit wandery, and they start to move around and maybe edging over the white line towards the right hand lane, assuming that they're using the left hand lane, which they should be doing. So as I said, if anybody has any questions, then please just post them. Otherwise I'm just going to plough on, because we do all have to get outside for 8 o'clock and clap the NHS. So number 4 is turning right at junctions. So this is usually evidenced by you moving into another road user's way, or the examiner seeing no evidence of effective checks to the right being made before you enter the junction, or poor road position. So again, you need to give your eyes time to look and see. Don't rush, don't turn your head too quickly. And be sure to properly judge the speed of oncoming traffic. Sometimes you find some of the roads when you're turning right, traffic can be travelling quite quickly on some of the roads that we enter, maybe well above the speed limit. You may be turning onto a road where the speed limit is 20 miles an hour or 30 miles an hour, and therefore it would be reasonable to hope that that's the speed that people are travelling at, but it isn't always the case. If you look too quickly and don't look at a car for long enough, you may not realise just how fast it's travelling. And if it's travelling faster than it should be and you pull out, you will still be deemed to be committing a serious fault, because that's a misjudgment on your part, even though it's their recklessness that is contributing to the issue. So you do need to keep your head busy. You need to look both ways. As a minimum, you're going to look right, left and right again, but that would be only for a quiet junction. Most junctions you're going to be needing to look left and right more often than that, to try and make sure that you are picking up what is going on ahead of you. Position is also important. Again, initially you want to stop behind the line. Okay. Hold on a minute, I'm just being prevented from posting that. Right, okay, so I'll just talk through this a bit. It's just stopping me from making any more posts at the moment because I'm doing all the posting. So the position of the car is important as you approach the junction. You're always going to stop behind the line if the view is not clear on approach, but importantly, position your car towards the right, obeying any markings, but stay on your side of the road. And that is also important. So when you're turning right from a major road to a minor road, you're going to expect to see, or quite often you will see, road markings towards the middle of the road, giving you somewhere safe to wait. Move over to that space. Don't stay in the lane that you were travelling in. Move towards it, but don't move over to the wrong side of the road. If there is no designated space, then you just move near the white line, but again, stay on your side. When you're turning right at traffic lights, I would advise against joining a queue that is waiting beyond the light if it is already 2 cars or more long. It's best to wait at the stop line and see if the queue clears in time for you to enter on green. If you enter car number 3 or 4 in the queue, and then those cars in front of you don't get to turn until the lights go back to red, you're going to find that you're making a very late turn on red, and the examiner is going to see that as very poor planning. So we've got a few of these. As I say, this is not an exclusive list, but these are some of the ones that I certainly see often. Turning right from Cross Street West, talked about it earlier, especially when there's buses using the bus stop opposite. But again, it's right at the beginning of your test. What also can often happen here is because the road's quite narrow, you'll be forced onto the wrong side of the road by the traffic post parked outside the post office. Sometimes people will stay on the right hand side of the road, and then you'll fail for basically being on the wrong side of the road before you exit. Also, you've got turning right onto Pelham New Road. I just said that. End of Reservoir Road again, same issues as before, not looking properly as you exit. Turning right onto Gibbet Street from the end of Thrumhall Lane. Now this is the road where Asda is. Turning onto Gibbet Street, the crossroads in question here is a notorious accident black spot. There is accidents probably at least once a month at that particular crossroads, caused usually by speeding traffic coming up or down Gibbet Street. So you need to be very careful there. You've also got a lot of parked cars making your view, obstructing your view. So the edging and leaning technique is paramount. And this is a situation where opening the windows a little bit as well so you can hear approaching traffic will really help. The crossroads again at the top of Brackenbed, for all the reasons I said earlier. It's a difficult junction. Turning right onto there causes problems. And turning right from Pinest Road, which is coming out of Selby Bridge towards Halifax. The issue here is you climb up the hill, and then the exit is an extremely wide road at the end. And what you'll find sometimes is that people will stay on the left-hand lane instead of moving over to the right-hand side of that road, of that particular exit. There's no lane markings. It's just very wide, and it's a case of doing what's reasonable and what would be expected. So you would position yourself to the right in order to exit there. So I'm going to move on to number 5 now, which is moving off safely. So your examiner will always expect to see effective checks whenever the car moves away from the side of the road. This should always include a final blind spot check. Now, the vast majority of the time when you move away, you'll be moving away from the left-hand side, so your final blind spot check should be over that right-hand shoulder to make sure that there's no traffic coming on your right-hand side. However, there is also the new manoeuvre in the, well, I say new, been going about over 2 years now, but the manoeuvre pulling over to the right and then moving away back into traffic, which will then be on the left-hand lane. There, your checks would be in the reverse direction, so your final check should be over the left-hand shoulder, and you should do it at least twice, especially immediately before you pull out, because that traffic will be travelling quickly, and if you've missed it, you will have a serious issue. So we're basically saying here, to avoid falling foul of this one, is always look properly before you move off to rejoin the flow of traffic. If in doubt, wait and then check again. And note that signalling to pull out is not a substitute for looking first. The onus is on you to judge properly if it's safe to pull out, not simply to expect others to avoid you. So, example hotspots. There are no particular places in Halifax where this is going to occur, or Huddersfield for that matter. It's more a case of you should look every time. If you find that your examiner seems to be pulling you in even more often than you might expect, and during a typical test you would expect to be pulled over between 4 and 6 times, but if they seem to be pulling you off very frequently or more often than that, then there's an indication there that they're not happy with what you're doing, and they're looking to see whether or not that's a bad habit or it's just occasional. So be very careful to try and pick up on those clues and make sure that you are checking, and try and avoid numerous repeats of the same minor fault becoming a serious fault. And be very careful to do a full 360 check, that's both blind spots, after your emergency stop. The emergency stop is usually performed correctly by most people. The brakes on modern cars are pretty powerful. However, the reason why it causes people to fail the test is that they just pull away at the end of it without checking. So don't fall foul of that one. Number 6, response to signs, in particular traffic lights. Now, the examiners expect you to obey traffic lights properly and to prepare for any anticipated changes as you approach. So you should be stopping at the nearest stop line for red, and you should be moving off promptly for green. The way to avoid yourself having a problem here is to spot traffic lights early. So become aware that there's a set of traffic lights as soon as you can, and adjust your speed on what you expect will to happen. And this will almost always mean slowing down a little, at least. If the lights are green when you see them, then it's reasonable to expect that they will be red by the time you get there. If they are red when you first see them, then try and pace yourself so that they're green when you do actually get there, and maybe you can avoid stopping. If they change to amber when you're near, then you should stop if you're 2 seconds or more away. If you're within 2 seconds, then it's usually best to go through unless the traffic ahead of you has stopped. To help you with judging the approach to traffic lights, there is a YouTube video that you can use. And this will show you how to approach traffic lights and also demonstrate good and bad practice. You also want to look beyond the traffic light junction as you approach. Be sure that you can exit if you're going to enter it. And similarly, I would advise against joining a queue that's waiting beyond your light if it's 2 cars or more long. It's best to wait at the stop line and see if it clears in time for you to enter on green. So, some hotspots around Halifax. All of the pedestrian crossing lights off at the exits of Bull Green. The issue here is that people have maybe had to tackle the roundabout, maybe looking for a gap, and it's maybe not been as easy as they'd have liked. So the concentration is on getting away from getting into the roundabout, and then coming off the roundabout, and they forget to check to see what's going on at the pedestrian crossing, and maybe some pedestrians are about to cross, the light's red, the examiner has to stop you. So remember to spot the pedestrian crossings off Bull Green. Not moving away on flashing amber when the Pelican crossing is clear. The one that most often goes through on test is the one at Sainsbury's, but basically a flashing amber light means that you can set off and start driving again as long as the crossing is cleared. And then turning right onto Queen's Road from Gibbet Street. Again, the issue here is the one of queuing. The lights have quite a short phase, and people coming up Gibbet Street will tend to enter the junction opposite you, maybe delay people turning right, and if you follow car number 3, you make yourself car number 3 or more in the queue, it's easy to find yourself stranded on a red light in the middle of the junction and turning very late as traffic from either side has started to move. So we're getting there now. We're now on to moving off under control. So the examiners will look for you to move off promptly, smoothly, and without placing the car under any undue stress. This usually gets recorded as a fault when people stall. Stalling in itself is not a serious fault, as long as it does not have any leave you in an unsafe position, e.g. halfway across the road, or it's not continuous or frequent, and it can be recovered safely and effectively, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Often stalling happens when a candidate is feeling under pressure. Not just on the driving test, you'll find this in the early stages of lessons as well. Once you start to get into busier traffic, you'll find that there's a natural tendency to rush when you feel as though there are people behind you that you don't want to hold up. So it could be general nerves, or it could be from the pressure, for example, being first in the queue at traffic lights. Some common mistakes to look out for that will reduce your chances of stalling. Trying to move off in third gear. If anybody watched the Secrets of the Driving Test program that was on last Thursday, one of the candidates failed the driving test for doing exactly this. He had the car in third gear, he tried to move off, he stalled. He tried to move off, he stalled. He tried to move off, he stalled. The examiner looked at him and said, "You're in third gear." And by that time it's too late. So remember to switch back to first gear as the car slows or stops. Allowing the car to roll back on a hill, your handbrake is being released prior to getting sufficient bite, or rushing the clutch, getting too much bite with the handbrake still on, or not enough gas. If you do stall, it's not the end of the world. If you keep a calm head and sort it out, then you're not going to fail your driving test, not unless you keep repeating the trick. So there are 4 R's for a successful stall recovery. Regain control of the car, usually applying the brakes, and of yourself. Breathe. Reset the controls. Check the gear, make sure you're not in third gear or second gear, whatever it happens to be. Use the handbrake if needed to avoid you rolling. And then restart the car. Depress the clutch. That may start the car when one with auto stop start. It does often on mine. But if not, then turn the key. And then the 4th R, and this is very important, reassess the situation. Check it's still safe and legal for you to move off. Because if it isn't, then stay where you are and wait for the lights to change or a new gap to appear before you move off. So, number 8. Position normal driving. The examiners expect the car to be driven predominantly in a central position in the most appropriate leftmost lane with sufficient clearance to obstructions. Remember the advice that I always give you. Left is best, right's a fight. Always recognise and aim to be in the leftmost lane that's available. Be especially careful. Sorry, I'm just going to mute my phone. Be especially careful with bus lanes. If you're outside the times shown and it's clear, you should be in it. Don't be misled by other road users who rarely seem to use them. Most people seem to stay out of bus lanes when they should be in them, and then they'll use them when they shouldn't. I don't know if it's ignorance or whether it's just trying to play the system. On narrow roads, be wary of driving too near the centre line, as it can mean being too close to oncoming cars. If in doubt, slow down. It'll give you more time to understand what's going on, and not feel panicked or put under undue pressure. So, example hotspots in Halifax. The bus lanes on Burnley Road and Huddersfield Roads. They are available to you at all times except for 7:30 in the morning till 9:30 and 4 o'clock in the evening till 6 o'clock in the evening. Now, if you think about the purpose of a bus lane, it is to keep the buses moving, so it'll be in operation when we have rush hour, when traffic is busiest. So it makes sense for you not to be using them at those early and late times. In between, you should be in it. And as I said, you will find that other road users won't be doing that, but don't be influenced by them. A couple of our favourites, travelling to and from Worley. Again, it's a narrow road. It's a faster speed limit. It's very easy to find yourself wandering either too close to the walls or too near the centre line. Going up and down Brackenbed, same issues. The first bend entering Bairstow Lane, which is it's just opposite Windleroyd Lane. It's going down Burnley Road in the direction of Friendly and the top of Chul Lane. It's a little left, goes down a very small cobbled section. Quite often as people come down it, they take the very first bend extremely wide, instead of staying much more towards the curb. If there's somebody coming the other way, that is going to be a major problem. There are no road markings. It's just about staying on the correct side of the road. As I just mentioned there, travelling up and down Windleroyd Lane, again very narrow. There's also a solid white line painted down the left-hand side, which is giving pedestrians somewhere to sit, to walk. So you must be outside of that, but if there's traffic coming your way, you may find that you need to move over it a bit. As long as there's pedestrians not there, that is fine. Ahead second exit on Bull Green Roundabout, coming from the train station. I mentioned this earlier, but again, people tend not to stay high. They'll tend to cross between the two lanes, and that will cause major problems in terms of road position. You could get failed under the mirrors change of direction, which was the second one, or incorrect road position. And exiting Orange Street Roundabout from the second lane. So when we exit Orange Street Roundabout, we should always be trying to use the leftmost lane, but quite often, because people have been confused by the roundabout itself, they'll end up coming off in the middle lane or the right hand lane if they're going towards the town centre, and then they'll be in the right hand lane when they really should be in the left. It can cause a problem by staying in that right hand lane too long, so they'll get failed under this section, or as I said earlier, they may panic and try to move back to the left hand lane without checking properly, and again that causes issues. So up to number 9 now, which is response to signs, in particular road markings. The examiners are going to expect you to obey the rules of the road and will fail serious transgressions. Often road markings catch candidates out due to a lack of attention or a misunderstanding. Now, unfortunately, the driving standards in the UK are, well, quite low in terms of adherence to the highway code, and sorry, I'm just going to have to swap profiles again so I can continue posting. Apologies for this. So as I said, the driving standards in the UK could be better. Because people don't tend to obey the highway code as well as they could do, you will tend to find that they will ignore road markings and they will drive over road markings quite often. As a result, the road markings become very worn, and the lack of budget means that they're often not well maintained either. So they can be hard to spot, and this can cause people problems when they're on the driving test. Right, so that's just to back up what I was saying about the road markings. So say your road markings may be hard to see. However, that's not always going to be accepted as an excuse by the examiners. Where road markings are faded, they're going to look for a reasonable response. So for example, if the stop line is faded at a set of traffic lights and the candidate rolls right up to the adjacent pedestrian crossing, they are likely to be failed, as it would be reasonable to recognise where you should stop, which would be further back. Other examples of faded road markings may be treated more leniently, but there are no guarantees. My advice is to try and become very aware of the usual pattern of markings at major hazards such as traffic lights, roundabouts, crossings, junctions, multi-lane roads, and basically fill in the blanks by having a reasonable expectation of what you'll find and driving steadily to allow you to conform to this and to validate it. Also, do not assume that other road users know what they're doing. If you find yourself thinking, "Oh, I didn't know you could do that," the chances are you shouldn't do it. Example hotspots. End of Queen's Road traffic lights. There's a set of traffic lights leading down onto the road outside Tesco. Between the lights at the high side of King Cross Street and the traffic lights on the road where Tesco's is, there are 5 places which you should not stop. First of all, there's a cycle box, then there's a pedestrian crossing, then there's a yellow junction box, then there's another pedestrian crossing, and finally there's a keep clear area. And in between those, there's usually space for just one car to stop. So between the pedestrian crossing and the yellow box, one car could stop. Between the yellow box and the next pedestrian crossing, the same, and between the pedestrian crossing and the keep clear. So here, basically, don't follow the car in front too closely. Make sure that you can see where they've got to before you follow them. Bus lanes again, so make sure you're obeying your bus lanes. Not using right turn boxes, so again, not looking to see that the right turn boxes are there and trying to move on to them, or crossing through an opposing right turn box. Now this especially happens when people are entering Court Lane or Springhall Lane or Free Skull Lane or going up Brackenbed. And what I mean by opposing boxes is that you basically have a crossroads and you have 2 right turn boxes, put one in front of the other, and the first one you will come to will be the one that's traffic travelling the opposite direction to turn behind you. You shouldn't drive through their box in order to get into your box. So the final one in the top 10 is reverse park control. When an examiner pulls you over to ask you to perform a manoeuvre, they're going to give you a clear objective of what the exercise, how the exercise should be completed, and they expect your final position to be within that, and they expect it to be achieved at a controlled pace safely. Now the first thing that I want to emphasize here, because people do get very, very worried about manoeuvres, and you'll notice that it's actually number 10 and it's only the reverse park control. Okay, the other 2 manoeuvres don't feature. You are more likely to fail your driving test out on the open road than you are doing your manoeuvre. Now that's not to say that you won't fail if you're doing your manoeuvre, if your manoeuvre is substandard, but the examiners are not looking for perfection. Obviously it'd be good if they see it, but that's not their expectation. They won't fail you simply for not completing the exercise correctly first time. The opportunity to correct will always be given. Maybe as many as 4 attempts are not unheard of, as long as they're being done safely. So the priority during any manoeuvre is safety. So ensure that your observations and control are up to scratch. A lack of initial accuracy whilst not ideal, will be forgiven. Common mistakes on the reverse parking manoeuvre, but some of these would also apply to the forward bay park and pulling up on the other side of the road as well. Not correcting an unacceptable position. Now, most examiners will give you at least a hint to try again by either staying silent when you've finished or asking maybe more than once, have you finished? Are you happy? Take the hint. Check your position. If it doesn't appear to be within the lines or close enough to the curb, then attempt a correction safely if needed. Other mistakes potentially are getting into an unsafe position during the exercise. So doing the parallel park, for example, getting too near to another parked car, or allowing your back end to stick out into the flow of traffic too much during the reverse part when you should be straightening up, or fully mounting the curb. Touching the curb, as long as you don't hit it too hard, will not necessarily result in an immediate fail, but starting to mount it will be. Finishing too far from the curb is also potentially going to be an issue. So that's the end of the top 10. I hope that's been useful. Before I go, does anybody have any questions? For example, is there anything you're surprised to see or not see in the list? Okay then. Well, I'm going to thank you for your time then. I hope you found it useful. I've just posted up there a playlist, which is a link to a series of videos I've done which feature serious faults on actual driving tests around Halifax. So every single one of the faults that you see in these videos was committed by a candidate during a driving test and resulted in a fail. I've tried to explain each one. Some of them are going to remind you of some of the stuff I've talked about tonight. You also see other examples of things that people have made. You'll hopefully recognise some of the places as well, and hopefully you'll find that seeing this and listening to the video today will avoid you making similar mistakes on your driving test. So that's it for now. I'm going to go now unless there's any final questions. Okay, well, thank you for your time, and I'll publish my next invite shortly. Good night.